Today I'm going to block a crescent shaped shawl. The particular shawl I'm going to block is the gondola shawl. Before you start blocking, you need to prepare a flat area. I use these squishy foam mats from Nipro, and I'm doing it on my dining room table. I've soaked the shawl in lukewarm water for a few minutes, squeezed out all the excess water in the towel. You will need pins. I use these T-pins from Nipro, but any pins will do. I also like these nip blockers, also from Nipro. They do make the job easier, but they're not essential. Now I'm going to try and keep the shawl in camera the whole time, but because of my setup and the fact that I'm doing this on my own, it is a little bit tricky, so do bear with me. I will do my best to try and show as much of the process as possible. Okay? So I like to start at the centre, which is about here. Now this shawl doesn't have any straight edges, and what I tend to do is I tend to use the nip blockers for the top edge of the shawl. The top edge kind of curves around a bit. So first thing I'm going to do is to roughly block that out. If you don't have nip blockers, you can just use pins. Problem with pins is once you start stretching the shawl into shape, they can sort of leave scalloped edges where you don't really want scalloped edges. Just make sure this curve is smooth. Now, with this sort of shawls, you will sometimes get a bit of a bump in the centre where you cast on, but you can block that out. So just be mindful of that as you're blocking it, and you can actually block that out. Now what I do first is I just try and roughly get the shawl into the right shape, and then I will go around and sort of fine tune it. Now what you want to check is you want to find your centre point here, and you want to just check that this curve is roughly the same shape and width on both sides. So I'm just going to grab my tape measure. So I want to make sure that from the centre front around here is roughly the same length as it is from the centre point there around to the other side. Yeah, that's right. So I'm now going to start pulling the edges out. And now I'm going to use the pins. Now that curve isn't as curvy as I'd like it to be. There is a bit of kind of fine tuning as you go, so don't worry if you don't get it perfect the first time. You can adjust it as you go. So what I tend to do is in this one, this shawl, it has the 3 bead detail, and those are the points that you're going to pull out. So what I do first is I just do occasional ones. I don't do sort of every single one. I just do occasional ones. I just try and do a few evenly around the shawl to make sure that I'm pulling it out as much on sort of one side of the shawl as on the other, if that makes sense. I don't want to pull it too much on this side of the shawl and then find I can't pull it as much as I want the other side of the shawl. So I'm pulling out kind of every second or third point, I think. I will eventually put a pin in every point. But if you do every sort of second or third to start with, and where I'm pulling it is where I've got the bead detail, 3 bead detail on the gondola shawl. So once you've got it sort of roughly into the right shape, just have a quick look at it and try and sort of just check that it's roughly in the right shape that you wanted, and then you can basically start filling in the gaps. So the points that you haven't pulled out, pull those out and pin them. And this is when you start stretching the shawl. So you want to stretch it as much as possible. With shawls, I don't think you can really stretch them enough. If your yarn's got any wool in it, it will shrink back a little bit once it's dry and you unpin it. If it's got silk in it, if it's pure silk or it's got a lot of silk in it, it will keep its shape much better, which is why I do like yarns with silk in them. So I'm basically just going around the edges now and pulling out every single point and adjusting the ones I've already pulled out. Now this is, with shawls like this especially, it's very, very important that your cast on edge is loose. If you're struggling to pull the points out and getting these scallops, that's because your cast on edge is too tight. Even if you think it's loose, it's got to be very, very loose for this. Or very stretchy. In fact, stretchy and loose is probably a good idea. So. Oops. Apologies for that, I think I knocked the camera slightly there. So again, don't be too worried about getting it sort of perfect the first time. Just get a sort of roughly the right shape. Each of the scallop points needs a pin. Now you can get bendy wires that you can use for this. I have got some. In fact, I've got two different thicknesses and I don't like either of them. I just find them too bendy. So I prefer to just use a pin. If you had the flexible wires, you can just put the wire through each one of these. I just found that the wires I've got, and I've got two different types, I just find them too flexible. I have got straight wires which I use when I'm doing straight shawls, also shawls with straight edges, but my flexible wires I don't particularly like. Okay, so I'm now going to start fine tuning it. So the shape here looked slightly odd. So once you've got it sort of roughly pinned out to the right shape, let me just see if I can. So that's what it looks like at the moment. So once you've got it roughly pinned out to the right shape and size, then you want to start fine tuning it. So you want to make sure that it's all straight and even and kind of roughly correct. Now looking at this, it seems to be skewing that way a little bit, so I'm going to just have a look. Now remember, this is where you can get a little bit of a sort of hump. But as you can see, that can be smoothed out quite nicely with blocking. Right, let's see. Now how picky you are is perfectly up to you. You could go and measure each. If you're very, very fussy, you can go and measure each one of these points and how far it is from the centre. Now obviously the middle is going to be further than on the sides. So if you want to, you could go and match the sides. So like the first point measures the same both sides, second one. I don't do that because, to be quite frankly, I think it's too fussy. I tend to eyeball things a bit. So if I think it looks okay, that's what I leave it. Because I think it's possible to be a bit too fussy with these things, to be quite honest. But so I'm just going around now and just fine tuning it a bit, just making sure that all the points are pulled out. Pulling them as much as I can and also trying to make sure that they're all sort of fairly even, so that some don't kind of go out much further than the others. Now I tend to stretch my shawl so much that it starts to almost lift. So this is just very much starting to lift slightly a bit now, so I know that that's stretched enough. If it does start to kind of lift up like that, then it's stretched a little bit too much, so then I'll just release it slightly. That one's lifting a bit, so I'll just release that one slightly. Double check anything. Now, measurements I tend to do for crescent shaped shawls is the inner crescent, which is around the top edge, and the centre depth here. Sorry, there. So I find the centre, the cast on centre, and the centre point, and I measure that bit, and I measure around the top edge. They tend to be the measurements I tend to give for crescent shawls. Now, how strictly you kind of follow the measurements, it's up to you. With shawls, it doesn't matter if they're not the exact size, just as long as it looks roughly and the right shape, and you've stretched it out to a nice shape and size, then that's fine. You don't have to check the measurements too carefully. So let me just see if I can. So that's a better shot of the gondola shawl, all blocked out. Okay. If you have any questions about blocking, crescent shawls in particular, do ask below this video or in the blog post that accompanies this, and I'll do my best to answer. If you'd like any more information about my patterns, if you'd like the gondola shawl, the pattern is available from my Ravelry shop. You can get links to my Ravelry shop and everything else I do, and sign up to my newsletter at www.yarnaddict.co.uk. There are links below as well. Thank you for watching.